Can you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself and what you do here at the CSR?
I'm the National Project Manager for the Industrial Energy Efficiency Project. We, as a centre, the National Unit Production Centre is one of the programs in the implementations unit, one of many units within the CSR. So my role as National Project Manager is to, I suppose in a way, manage the achievement of the outcomes, the deliverables, but also in more important ways ensure that we engage with the industry in a manner that creates the environment and the ability for us to achieve those targets, those KPIs in the project, and also look at the formation of a team and the capacitation of a team to deliver on those KPIs. So first and foremost is to meet stakeholder requirements. But beyond that, I think the impact and outcomes of the IEE project extends far beyond just that.
6 years of the project, what have been some of the highlights and lowlights, I guess?
6 years after we launched in 2010, there are many highlights. And in fact, we know we have been guilty of, and we've been accused of having our heads so deep into driving and achieving and chasing targets and outcomes that at times we neglect to sit back and just reflect on what we've really achieved. In terms of the obvious numbers, the savings were quite phenomenal. It was 1.2 terawatt hours or 1,200 gigawatt hours, quite significant and equivalent greenhouse gas emission reduction, and also a huge amount of money, about 1.8 billion rand saved in energy spend. But those are the numbers. I think beyond that, what was certainly fulfilling and a highlight to me was the formation of a more vibrant energy services sector. Through the work we did, we fostered and promoted energy services as a more meaningful option to young graduates or even more salted and experienced practitioners in the field of energy efficiency to enter this area, because there was a growing need and a lack of understanding in industry about it. So it was fostering that, and it's evidenced by the numbers of expert consultants we have within the NCPC. 5 years ago, when I joined, we had maybe a group of no more than 30. Today we have a group of experts that we can draw on to undertake our assessments, provide technical assistance in excess of 120. So that, in a very small microcosm, is reflective of what I see in the broader market out there. I think what we have done is, and you don't understand or you may not appreciate the importance of it, but we've shifted the dialogue and the focus from component systems optimizations to systems optimization, where instead of focusing on the efficacy of changing or upgrading or improving a component, is to look at the whole system in effect and have a look at and understanding how changing one component within a system can impact on the performance of the other components or the system as a whole. And we have found, and today I think the discussion in and around boardrooms and at public platforms is very heartening to hear the conversation about systems optimization, because there's now a greater understanding and appreciation that savings from systems optimization are significantly higher than and more sustainable from savings as opposed to component optimization. And in a nutshell, what we do is our approach is that we look at the process first. We identify how optimizing the process can reduce a demand for energy. And once we've done that, we work in reverse to what was conventionally the way of approaching it. We would then look at the distribution of that energy source, whether it's a primary or a secondary energy source, and we work back to the point of generation. And then we customize or we size the generation to meet the needs of the plant and not vice versa. And that has been a fundamental change. And I think the adoption of that thinking in South Africa has been largely through the work the IEE project has done. Another great highlight has been the at the time almost unknown to us, but setting the foundation for some of the regulatory requirements that will follow soon in South Africa. Notice 259 of the Energy Act of 2008 will compel companies consuming significant amount of energy to either report their energy consumption to the department annually or to submit a 5-year energy plan signed off by the accounting officer of the company. To do that, you need to develop an understanding and a platform so that based on that platform, that essentially is the framework of your energy management system, that you're able then to report into and meet and comply with those requirements. The energy management system that the project implemented in South Africa as early as 2010 clearly provides that. So energy management systems, through the way we implement it, is aligned to ISO 50001. And the big difference between what happened prior to 2010 and what happened subsequent to the publication of that ISO standard 50001 was that we had South African companies who were essentially subsidiaries of international companies, or those that were trading beyond our borders and playing within that global export arena, found it important to certify. So the early certification interest in South Africa was driven largely by those needs. What we're starting to see now are South African companies understanding the value and the importance of it. So they're understanding the need to sustain the gains that they make, and the energy systems enable them to do that. So our energy management system has singularly been responsible for the biggest saving that we've achieved within the IEE project. And I believe we haven't touched the surface. If you consider that in the first 6 years of the project we engaged with 384 companies, and you consider that in terms of manufacturing companies in South Africa, at the last report I've seen, we have somewhere in the magnitude of 14,000. Now, if you trim from those 14,000 the small and micro enterprises, then we clearly have a huge amount of work ahead of us to extend that reach greater. But the philosophy of the project is one where we do not personally seek to merely engage and implement. We seek to capacitate. And that has been the other major success of what we've done. It's through capacitation in a very unique manner. South Africa hasn't seen training of this ilk before. It's capacitation in a vocational guidance manner. It's learned by doing and learned by watching. We have taken young graduate engineers, and we've taken some experienced utility managers and plant engineers, and we have taught them a different way to look at and optimize their energy systems. And through that capacitation, we have started to spread the ability for companies to implement some of these systems themselves and to implement energy management systems themselves. So the idea through what we started in 2010 is to ensure that we capacitate a growing number of people every year to continue doing it on their own, as well as the work that we continue doing, expanding that pool and working with industry. And I'm hoping through that multiplier effect that we can reach a larger amount of those 14,000 manufacturing companies in South Africa. I have no doubt that the ones we have targeted thus far have seen the benefit of that, and most of them will sustain what we've done. It's not all been great. We've had our failures. We've had some spectacular failures. We've worked with very large corporates in South Africa, large energy users, that through a lack of internal commitment from top management have failed dismally in driving sustainability of the energy management systems we've implemented. From companies that were really set to do well, losing all the advantages gained through our implementation and virtually going back to square one because of the loss of some critical and key elements. And that's one of the barriers to energy management systems and energy efficiency, not only in South Africa but globally, in that the technical knowledge resides within one or two individuals of the company, and it's not broadened. And when you don't have top management commitment, that becomes one of the big challenges. So in saying that, we have learned a lot about how to improve it in phase 2, and we are applying those lessons. And one of the biggest lessons learned in phase 1 that we are applying and have started applying in phase 2 is to understand and support the role that behavior change plays in all of this. Behavior change is shown to us, and through the UNIDO office I've learned it has demonstrated that equally strongly in the other 16 operation countries in the world where IEE project is being implemented, that behavior change becomes the single biggest driver of success in the kind of work that we are doing. So it's really about, and I met a large group of, I met with the senior managers, corporate managers and GMs of a large South African corporate the other day. And I distilled it essentially into two very simple pillars. It's about data, the correct data, understanding it, analyzing it, making sure that the data is relevant, and it's about people. And when it comes to people, it's about making sure you start winning the hearts and minds of them, so that energy becomes a front of mind issue. The days of driving energy or any initiative from the top down are long gone. I think it's met with skepticism and maybe resistance from the operators and technicians and lower level managers on the floor. So what we seek to do and what we are driving from the lessons learned in phase one is the value of driving energy management systems both from the top down and bottom up. And we have seen some of the incredible successes that arrive out of that. And the other thing that I've learned, to just summarize and put a cap on this discussion in terms of our highlights and lowlights, was that there's no one size fits all. I've seen companies develop energy management system in a style and in a language and in a manner that was peculiar to their needs, their conversation and their business. There was a company that implemented that saw trust as the essential ingredient on which to build an energy management system. And they did not proceed until they had that established level of trust between the top management, the employees, the owners, and the workers in the company. And that's quite amazing. Others have taken slightly different routes. But what all of this does, it speaks to about looking at how within your company you can get somebody to understand why he has to switch off an idle machine, not producing anything, switch a light off in a common area. Why he has to be aware of how his and her actions impact on energy consumption, and how that in turn impacts on the tenure of their job and job security they have in the business. And once you can start to achieve that level of appreciation and buy-in, then I think you are pretty well set to really achieve great things.
Absolutely. And if you had to look sector by sector, which are the sectors that really need the most improvement in terms of energy efficiency, and who is doing the best?
When we started, Gregory, we identified what we thought are the 5 energy-intensive sectors in South Africa. We looked at agro-processing, automotives, mining, chemicals and liquid fuels, and we looked at iron and steel. And yes, they are large users. Very soon we discovered that those are not all that we need. There were other sectors outside that 5 that needed as much help. And we very quickly adopted the attitude that we would rather be more inclusive than exclusive. So we started to look at other sectors, pulp and paper, clothing, footwear, textiles and leather, and we've expanded that into the commercial sector, data centers, warehouses, commercial buildings. We have found that some of the biggest savings we've recorded to date in the project have come out of the non-metallic mineral sector, cement, lime, iron and steel sector, and the automotive sector. And I think it's because not only are they large users of energy, but they were facing some serious global competition. In terms of the iron and steel sector, they were facing softer global iron and steel prices. They were even facing dumping by China in South Africa. So a lot of them were at the risk of closing down. In fact, one of our flagship companies faced that very real scenario in 2011. A lot of the automotive companies are under pressure to improve their energy performance relative to other automotive sites globally. They are not competing with each other in South Africa. Toyota does not compete with Volkswagen. Volkswagen Newton will compete with other Volkswagen sites in Africa and Southeast Asia and South America. So it's ultimately driving the focus on reducing the energy content per car produced. And we have seen Toyota in Prospecton go from being the worst energy Toyota plant globally to being in the top 3 in the world today by implementing one of our energy management system. So those are the sectors that need them. But there are other sectors where use may be smaller but nevertheless significant. Plastics, we are dealing at times with, we're seeing this more and more with buildings, banks, warehouses, the hospitality industry, hotels, shopping centres. And we're seeing opportunities there, but the big users of energy in South Africa, besides Transnet, that's an incredibly large user of energy, would be the non-metallic mineral plants, the 4 or 5 big cement plants, the 3 or 4 big motor assembly plants in South Africa, and maybe a handful of large steel plants and a large clay brick making plants. They would be the plants where we can make some really great inroads by doing some very basic work with them.
That's the low-hanging fruit.
Absolutely.
And what sort of uptake do you get from rank and file up to management when you come in with these new ideas?
It's more a case of what are we prepared to accept than what they're willing to do with us. We have found in the beginning that management, and one of the lessons learned over the first 6 years was the lip service paid to top management commitment. They would come along and say, we support this. They will sign off on the energy policy. And they would believe then that they have concluded their task and that they can wipe their hands and move on. This is not that kind of commitment. This needs a lot more than signing an energy policy. So our engagement with companies depend largely on the nature, the size, and the extent of the footprint in South Africa. So if top management are not on board, and they do not buy in or subscribe to that visibility, that time taken, the need to appoint an energy manager, the need to allow that energy manager the space and time to implement and maintain the system, or to support the energy manager or energy representative in the plant. And I use those terms quite loosely because it changes from company to company. We're not prescriptive about that. In some they may call them an energy marshal, in others they may call them an energy champion. It really doesn't matter to us. But if top management fail to support that group, the energy manager, energy rep and the energy team, then there's no chance of success. So that's a prerequisite. We do not need any particularly great depth of skill in any company because we can impart that through our training and capacity building. We simply need top management commitment to allow us to come in and work with them. And we need them to understand there's a need to change, there's a shift, there's a need to shift the thinking so that they start including energy in the day-to-day and operational things. To stop thinking about the business as purely price-earnings ratio or profitability or production output, but to start relating production output to energy consumed and to measure their energy performance as they measure their production and quality performances too. And it's that change that we ask management to make. And once they have come on board, and we believe that they are truly on board, we then start looking and doing an energy review, look at what they consume. We develop action plans from that. We set targets. We go ahead and we implement that. And then we always check that. Are we achieving what we thought we would? We will review that and say, have we achieved what we set out to achieve and why not? And we'll continue doing that and then continue that cycle with their support. So that is really our methodology and our manner of engagement.
And environment is obviously a big talking point. What sort of carbon footprint alleviation can be achieved?
Yeah, when I talk to the cynics about the environmental and the tree huggers, they always poke and joke at us. But I am starting to discern an attitudinal change, albeit small at this stage, in South African business, where it's not only about driving profits. It's now looking at that triple bottom line, looking at the impact on the environment and the people within the business. And as part of the UNIDO program, it's very important that we equally foster the interest of women. So gender mainstreaming, gender equality is a very strong focus within what we're doing in phase 2, and that we drive initiatives that will promote poverty alleviation. And those are the underlying tenets of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. And through the work we do in South Africa in energy, they are not far from our mind. So when we evaluate how we've done, we look at whether we've secured jobs, we've retained them, and whether we've grown jobs. and how many women fulfilled meaningful roles in achieving that. So that has become important too.
And in comparisons to the other 16 countries involved in this project?
South Africa, by virtue of the fact that I think our government was proactive at the time, and they need to be commended for that. South Africa was the first country to have adopted that. South Africa was also, and may still be, the only country today amongst those other 16 that have adopted and launched the full range of services within the IEE project. So in a big way, South Africa is seen as a big brother to them. In fact, the exchange and the discussions and the communication and the engagement between PMUs, project management units, in other countries is starting to increase. And it became evident to me when I was invited to share and present South Africa's achievements, performances to date in the IEE project in the presence of the other countries in Vienna in May this year, that we have clearly matured in many instances where we have moved beyond the mantle of the UNIDO support and started to effect greater customization of, for example, our training material to suit and speak to South African conditions and South African case studies and South African examples. But also in the way we've managed the capacitation and the assessment process. We've also learned from them. I think there are certainly great lessons that I have learned from what is being done in Indonesia and Iran. And I look at lessons learned in Moldova, and I learned from in Ecuador, and we learn from that. So there's a role that South Africa has taken within the community of IEE operational countries that UNIDO is implementing this project in, of almost one that's a big brother, even to the Russia and the Ukraine and some of the larger countries within that group. But one that I can very proudly say we are now starting to add great value to the program. When we started this program in South Africa in 2010, 99 or 95% of our trainers were international specialists, best practice specialists from Europe and America, that have worked in similar programs in the preceding 10 years. Today, we have 90% South African trainers delivering, but more so, we have 8 South Africans that are doing training in other countries. So clearly we have demonstrated to UNIDO, and clearly by vindication of the acceptance of our trainers in the other 16 countries, we have demonstrated that South Africa has not only learned quickly, but matured to a level where we can, as equals, present training in the Philippines, Malaysia, Iran, Egypt, Vietnam, Indonesia, from a program started here in 2010.
How can we bring those programs more into high schools, junior schools, to get the youngsters in this earlier?
It's a challenge that we embraced in midterm through the first phase of the project. We started to look at the universities. We started to talk to some of the universities, the premier universities in South Africa. Stellenbosch really showed a great interest in this. And they looked at and considered the offering of postgrad engineering or science modules, courses in energy management systems optimization and energy systems optimization. It didn't get far. We engaged, amongst others, UCT and a few other universities and DUT, but it didn't get far either. We are keen to do that, and Wynand van der Merwe, our skills development manager, has been engaging more broadly across those. We've been talking to the University of Pretoria, University of Johannesburg, and more recently we've engaged the Mangosuthu University of Technology, MUT, in KZN. And they have made probably the most serious overture and commitment to introduce what we have been doing as postgrad courses or even undergrad courses within their institution. And that is a good start. We have engaged the UCT Energy Research Center, ERC, with a lot of our energy systems training during their master's program. But I don't think we've nearly done enough to address what you're talking about. The need to step into high schools and make energy a career choice for a lot of young grade 12s. To talk and also to instill a greater sense of awareness in them of the importance of energy efficiency, not only in the workplace, but also domestically in the home. So that is one area I believe that phase 2 will challenge us to do more. And in one of our components in phase 2, we speak exactly about that in what we see as bridging training, where we go to TVET colleges and we take young graduates from TVET colleges and offer them a bridging course that will render them eligible to enter our expert training program. So that's a start.
And the timeline and goals for phase 2?
Phase 2 goals are really, the high level goal is the greenhouse gas emission reduction equivalent to 3 million tons of CO2 emissions equivalent. So considering that in phase 1 we achieved 2,000 over a 5-year period, phase 2 we need to achieve 50% more over a 4-year period. So clearly some tough targets. But phase 2's term is due and set to end on 31st of December 2019. We're almost a full year into that 4-year period. The good thing is that we're doing it on a basis and a experience of having done so in phase 1. So there's an element of seamless continuation of some expanding of the scope and just taking on the additional duties. But I believe we are far better set than we were during phase 1 when we scrambled in the first year to constitute and recruit and set up the original project team. We have the team in place. We have the structure in place. We have the awareness within, both internally in the NCPC and CSR, but also within industry in place. We have the team of experts that we have generated and trained and developed during phase 1. So really, I believe the ingredients are there to take on the challenges of phase 2. No matter how stretching they may be, I believe we have the ability to achieve that. In particular areas where we will be challenged would be the areas referring especially to components 1 and 2 that speak to the Department of Energy and the Department of Trade and Industry, maybe even the Department of Environmental Affairs. But it's looking and working with those government departments so that we can elevate the awareness, we can improve the communication between them to avoid duplicity in terms of regulations and demands of reports from industry. We can harness the capacities within those departments and align them to some of the common goals that we have as a country to ensure that we reach and achieve them more expediently than working in 3 silos.
And energy efficiency is often being referred to as the first field. How would you respond to that?
Absolutely. The study was initially conducted by ACEEE, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, and it was largely done by comparing the cost of power. And they looked at the cost of power for renewables, wind power generation, PV solar, biomass. They looked at nuclear, they looked at pulverized coal and fuel oils. And the prices generally ranged from about 8 to 12 US cents per kilowatt hour. Energy efficiency compared to that was set at 3 US cents per kilowatt hour. So I suppose if you can change the way you look at energy efficiency, or you look at energy efficiency in a way that reduces the need to expand the amount of power generation or power stations South Africa needs, then we can achieve that significantly cheaper. And I speak to colleagues, I speak to a lot of the experts within renewable energy, and the plea to them is essentially this: we support what you're doing. In fact, we buy into what you're doing so strongly that we will do some of that ourselves in phase 2. But before you go out and look at the sexy renewable energy technologies, consider the importance of the very boring energy efficiency improvements you need to undertake. And the boring refers to existing technologies, improving the day-to-day operations of those equipment processes within your plant, and driving down kilowatt hours. And once you've achieved that, once you've achieved a great measure of success in doing so, then consider the renewable energy. But as a first fuel, energy efficiency remains not only the most cost-effective, but also the most logical first step to looking at ways of improving your primary energy sources.
And how can we encourage government to take more of a lead to municipalities switching their street lights off? I mean, it just seems crazy to have all the lights on until 6 in the morning.
The mandate of the IEE project is, as the name implies, and as our primary funder implies, the Department of Trade and Industry. We are the Industrial Energy Efficiency Project. So whilst our mandate did not include public entities like municipalities and wastewater treatment plants and local governments, we have engaged in that area and we have supported. We are starting to see, or we have seen for a while in many of the municipalities we work for, a greater need and an understanding that things need to change, that they can't continue the way they are. And I think once that condition or mindset starts to set in, then you have something to work with. And I believe that is ongoing, and in some municipalities the performance is better than in others. But we are currently working and collaborating with another project in our country, funded through USAID, looking at, amongst others, how they can improve fresh and wastewater treatment plants in South Africa. And they started looking at the Cape Town and the Durban city municipalities, and will expand that beyond those. But the need to look at that and the need to identify that when Germany started to rebuild their infrastructure after really World War II, and what gave rise to the foundation of a lot of the good work done in Germany was looking at wastewater treatment plants. And it's how they started to build not only the understanding of environmental impact and the need for energy efficient operations that catalyzed a lot of the thinking that ultimately became something that industry could apply. So in South Africa, if we look at what we currently have, there are 220 municipalities. Each one has access to a wastewater treatment facility. There are larger, maybe 16 larger water boards in South Africa. Our understanding is that if we can optimize those large pump stations, we can free more of the local government power allocation to industry. Because in the normal course of business, wastewater treatment plant is considered a priority service, and they are allocated from the total budget within each town or municipality or local government. They are allocated a proportion of the power that they purchase through either the municipality directly from Eskom or through generation that agreements they may otherwise have. So if we can improve pump systems optimization, for example, within pumping stations, in water pumping plants, we can free some of that fixed allocation to allow the municipality to dedicate more to industry, allowing industry less power outages and the opportunity to expand without the fear of curtailment of inconsistent power supply.
And the internet, as we look at technology going forward, the Internet of Things is the big buzzword. How can that improve energy efficiency as we move forward?
Incredibly. I was amazed by the amount of budget being earmarked to the Internet of Things, looking at
$1 trillion almost.
Incredibly large. In fact, it dwarfs the kind of funding that I see coming into projects like ours. But there's no doubt that when we start looking at the impact that smart grids may have through smart metering, may have on the ability to manage energy, to shift energy so that we operate within what we have and what is available in South Africa, I believe that plays a big role. And whilst on first read, Malcolm Rifkin's Third Industrial Revolution sounded quite strange when he spoke about collaborative power, and I think when we hear what is being said today, and in a recent IQ conference in Cape Town, one of the leaders in this area tabled a proposal for a very different structure in South Africa, removing from Eskom some of the current responsibilities and power it has, and investing that in the public sector that would be able to deliver more efficiently and more speedily on the needs within the national economy. So the discussion seemed to have started, albeit very early, but we are starting to see some thought-provoking ideas and concepts on how we can evolve this economy of ours from this monolithic generator and supplier of electricity in South Africa to one that's more distributed. At this stage, that may be a few bridges ahead in terms of where we are, but it's clearly something that the conversation is getting louder.
And skills obviously a big talking point. Where are the key skills areas where school leavers should be looking? This is an area where I could find employment after I get some qualifications.
I am sure many years ago, environmental science or environmental services were not given a really big consideration when it came time to select careers and decide on careers. It's clearly becoming more and more so. With the amount of international agreements we have signed as a country and government, with the amount of space, media and other being given to this green economy and green jobs and green skills, clearly that has become more relevant and more pertinent and more, I suppose, attractive to young grade 12s or university entrants. So I believe that the training that we have started, where we bridged a gap essentially between what we observe to be an academic and theoretically strong postgraduate body of engineers and scientists, and a lack of the fundamental understanding within industry of people that have the experience in dealing with energy systems and troubleshooting them and fixing them up. So to kind of breach that gap, the IEE project stepped in and really dealt with the deficiencies in both of those camps. We provided academics or graduates with a practical knowledge of how to apply that knowledge in optimizing energy systems. And we imparted some of the fundamental knowledge on heat transfer, fluid flow, thermodynamics to the practitioners in industry that have been doing that for 30 years. And they know what to do to fix it up. They may not know why it's working, but they know what to do to fix it up. So the IEE project served to bridge that gap. And in doing so, present South Africa with a pool of experts, both embedded in companies or as consultants, that could take this forward and to start expanding this green skills pool that is so necessary for this green economy of ours.
Green buildings obviously vitally important to energy efficiency. Should we legislate that? Companies really need to get on board with that?
We have, and I've seen what other countries are doing in this regard, and we'd like to think that it's almost preferred to have them change willingly through incentives, but we may not be far away from having to look at more punitive ways of driving that change. There are many others besides green buildings. From my personal perspective, the issue on energy efficiency motors is a big issue in South Africa. We don't have large motor manufacturers, so there's no need to lobby against the need to upgrade to energy efficiency motors, but yet we don't have that legislated. There's the legislation on energy management systems and energy reporting, which may be out soon. There's the legislation on carbon tax that will be really punitive for those not tapping into the benefits of improving the energy efficiency performance. So I've no doubt that a very sensible balance of both the carrot and the stick will achieve that effect. And I must be honest with you, at times I tend to step over into the camp that you've just defined and feel that that industry is not responding strongly enough, and it could either be because our energy costs are still too low. And today, on the 1st of November, as we enter stage 3 water conservation measures in the Western Cape, I believe we will start to make that mind, we'll start to force that change of mind or that behavior change. And in the same way, I think we're faced with that in terms of what we do in the NCPC. Landfill cost disposal are too low. Energy costs are too low. Water costs per kiloliter are too low. So other than punitive legislation or increased tariffs, I don't know what else it will take to see a far greater and positive and stronger movement towards more responsible consumption of those.
Is there any way to incentivize that?
There are many incentives. In fact,
but for the man in the street to use less water at night instead of charging him more.
Yeah, that's
Can you get a tax rebate if you use less water?
It may be an option. I haven't thought about that, but quite honestly, it's something that in industry we have seen is starting to work. when we stepped into this role in 2010, we encountered enormous resistance and skepticism in industry about the sincerity of government in this, or about the ability and capacity of government to deliver on this. And we have witnessed over the last 5 years, and particularly maybe over the last 3 years more so, a commitment within government to actually deliver on its promise, to process applications for co-funded grants, to undertake the necessary support of industry and the regulatory bodies to drive through certification or through measurement and verification accredited bodies some of the results that they aim to achieve in 12L and others. So I believe that in terms of government support, that has clearly been there. In fact, just to share with you, when the Manufacturing Competitiveness Enhancement Program was launched, government earmarked over a 3-year period 5 billion rand towards that in co-funded grants, ranging from a 40% grant to as much as a 60-70% grant if you met certain conditions. You had to spend the money first to get the grant. It took us almost a year and a half into the program before we saw the first applications come trickling through. So it's not always that we feel the government's to blame, but industry's response to government, or maybe what we are seeing is that the credibility of government has started to improve. That maybe there's this legacy of bad credibility that may have caused and given rise to the reticence to participate in these projects. We are now seeing far greater take-up, far greater interest. We're seeing far greater action in terms of the amount of accredited bodies that can support 12L. We are seeing the applications for MSEP completely oversubscribed, albeit that they're mostly large companies. I would have preferred to see a better balance between small and large companies. But we're starting to see that now. And the reason we're seeing that now, because there's belief that it has helped competitor companies or peer companies, and there's a belief that it can help them. So I believe that going forward, we may see a greater appreciation and uptake and buy-in to government incentive programs. And we may be at the point where, and my candidate and host and demo plant companies may not like to hear this, but we may be at the point where higher tariffs and more punitive legislation will drive that. Carbon tax, if it's going to be implemented, when it's implemented, sometime in 2017, or maybe even beyond, may be diluted to the point that it really is not going to be very effective with thresholds of 95%. I believe in time, if we can, through programs like the IEE project, drive greater reach so that we rather make this a voluntary conversion to consuming less water, consuming less energy, then I believe we've achieved that goal without too much pain. But that is not reality. In reality, we still find resistance and very careless and negligent and maybe reckless management of very scarce environmental sources. So we may be sitting at a point where, despite what we'd like to think happened, we may be forced to accelerate the conversion by forcing them through legal action.
Do you find that the government is unfairly treated by the media often and is doing a lot more than people would give them credit for?
Yes, in the sense that government may be misunderstood, in the sense that sometimes the challenges that government face may be misunderstood. I think there's an element to that. Government in some cases have brought a lot of that on themselves. But when I speak to directors, deputy senior directors today within DEA, DOE and DTI, I'm pleasantly surprised with the depth of understanding of what is needed and the willingness to consult and the understanding about the need not to alienate industry but to work with the private sector in driving some of the achievements we are set and are duty bound to achieve, not only for our own national good but also out of respect for all of those international agreements we've signed.
The logistics industry is crying out for Euro 5. When are we going to see this becoming mandatory in terms of diesel?
I have no idea. It is. In fact, I have been following a few of the others that I mentioned to you earlier, which is, amongst others, energy efficiency motors. I've been looking at this energy reporting. There's the labeling of white goods, there's the standby power for appliances and all of those. I've been watching those, and they have been taking a very long time to come through. Whether it is because they are consulting very broadly, or there's just the pace at which things happen within some of the bureaucratic internalities of certain departments, I don't know. But that has taken a long time. So it's difficult to say to you when that will happen. I'm only hoping that by sheer weight of the need to remain competitive, or the need to drive an economy that treats and consumes responsibly, we may see that happen quicker than or sooner than we think. But at this stage, it's very difficult to predict.
Apparently in Europe, when people are buying trucks, they look at the CO2 emissions before they look at the price.
Not all of them, but they are. They are what we call the early adopters in that change. They would consider the environmental impacts and even be willing to pay a little bit more for the item. Have we reached that level of maturity in South Africa? I doubt that. And a colleague of mine in India who shared a stage with me, an eco-label stage with me many years ago, said to the audience that to sell the concept of environmental friendly products through eco-labeling in India, when more than half the population can hardly afford to put the t-shirt on the back of their little child, is a difficult sell. So we need to balance those. And in South Africa, we are not very different in the challenges we face. With the huge and large gaps between the wealthy and the poor. So I have no doubt that I think there is an element in South Africa that have been quite proactive and understand the importance and value of this. But we need to be cognizant of the need of the poor, and that's why in my earlier statement, poverty alleviation remains a big thing. And what we do through a lot of our work within companies adjacent to rural areas or peri-urban areas, companies in certain areas where the workers or the workforce comes out of homes without electricity, not connected to the grid. There's a need to educate, because the first time energy is encountered in any major force other than biomass at home is when they enter the workplace, when electricity and some of the other thermal fuels used within industry are first encountered. So a lot of the awareness raising we undertake within those plants take on a very strong social flavor, in that it's through teaching them how to conserve energy at home for those that have electricity will instill the kind of mindset and behavior that will ensure they do that when they come to work as well. So our work is not divorced totally from what happens beyond the walls of the factory or beyond the fence line, because that's equally important for us.
And if you can put $1 cent saving to the man in the street, surely that incentivizes it right off the bat.
Absolutely. And there's been some very good roadshows by ESCOM and others that speak to the employers in a manner that the employers relate to, through musical shows, through demonstration of Wendy houses with appliances in, that we have seen used in some of the companies we work with, to forget the factory need, forget the heavy machinery and plant in the factory. It's just simply taking them into an environment that they're more familiar with and show them what warming up a kettle of water does, as opposed to putting on a hairdryer and a microwave and switching a light on. And when they start to appreciate that, it's easier to convert them to the need to be more energy aware in the plant.
Waste to energy is a big talking point. How can we get all our landfills functional as a commodity?
Waste has been one of our thematic areas within the National Cleaner Production Centre, and it's almost been ignored for a while. In 2008, we, as the NCPC, we launched what we call the Industrial Symbiosis Program in South Africa. We weren't ready for that in South Africa. And a year later, it died a slow death. We re-engaged that in 2014, and we found a far greater willingness. And we were surprised by the success of that. Initially through the provincial government of the Western Cape, and then expanded nationally through the NCPC into what we called KISP, which is KwaZulu Industrial Symbiosis Program. The Western Cape one is WISP, and then GISP, which is the Gauteng Industrial Symbiosis Program. And through that, we have been absolutely blown away by the willingness of companies to trade between the haves and the and the wants. And we're starting to see the trading of not only raw or waste as raw material input, but we're starting to see energy benefits flow from that, significant energy benefits. By reducing a lot of the virgin input material required by using waste from another company, by cutting down on your footprint, your transportation footprint to convey your waste to landfill site, all of a sudden we're seeing an energy impact that we didn't know was as large as it's proving to be. So aside of diversion of landfill site, aside of the reduction of extraction of raw materials, there's been a very pleasant spin-off in terms of energy savings and real input cost savings.
And as we look at the gas-powered buses in Pretoria, how much more efficient is gas than traditional?
Gas is an energy-efficient fuel. It may be more expensive, but because of its higher calorific value, its better burning rates, it is more efficient to use. And as a whole, to achieve the same process output, you will use less gas than electricity, and it's effectively cleaner. It's also effectively, in many ways, less expensive than the traditional electricity. We support that in a big way, and we have seen through the establishment of the Biogas Association of South Africa that there was first the need to explain the difference between biogas and some of the other LPG and other gases that they were kind of combined with at one stage. That battle has been won, and we now have an independent organization that seeks to promote and support the interest of biogas in South Africa. And it's not only buses, but taxis. You'll be amazed at the conversion, the amount of taxis in Johannesburg that have converted from, or not converted, but they've simply added as an alternative fuel biogas or compressed natural gas. And they're using that at a conversion cost of 15,000 Rand. It's a payback almost within 3 months with the kind of mileage they cover within a day. They don't take out their petrol engine, their traditional engine. They use that when they run out of gas. But it's become a more cost-effective way to operate and also a more environmentally friendly way to do it. I believe that the biogas use in South Africa has seen early days, that we are going to see not an explosion, but we're going to see an acceleration of the adoption of biogas plants in South Africa. There's been some attempts to copy what they have in Europe and transplant and install that in South Africa. It's not as simple as that. Technologies are different because feedstocks are different, conditions are different. So those that have come here and developed a system for South African feedstock, for South African conditions, have succeeded. And we've seen what Bio2What has done in Bronkhorstspruit for BMW. We're seeing in January next year the launch of another 4.5 megawatt biogas plant by Horizons in Cape Town. And we're seeing some others across the country by Energia and the like, Clean Energy Africa. So I am buoyed by the successes that I've witnessed. Yes, we have some failures. In the Northern Cape, I've met with some agro-process plants and co-ops that have attempted biogas plants at some of the abattoirs by learning, going to Europe and having a look at what they're doing and trying to replicate that in South Africa. And there's some problems with some of those plants. But elsewhere, where the approach was far more circumspect and that was considered very well, we have seen successful biogas plants. And I'm also seeing the growth of biogas plants in neighboring SADC countries, which is another good imperative. I'm seeing what Botswana is planning to do, Zambia and Namibia. And they are clearly starting to exploit the benefits that we have within just some of the natural anaerobic digestive feedstocks that we have within our agricultural industry and even within our food waste industry. We have an example of a small biogas plant that was set up in a shopping centre in Cape Town very recently. Worked well for a while, and I believe it's been decommissioned since. But it's that kind of willingness to look at the opportunities that it presents that will see biogas spread and grow as an good and viable alternative source. Because once you have optimized your traditional energy sources, you're going to look at renewable energies. You will look at bioenergy for alternative ways of generating the power that you need. And biogas is one.
And the legislation, wasn't it 2% biofuel in the energy mix? Are we there, and what can we do to get there if we're not there already?
It's, in fact, the legislation has not been passed, and it's for that reason the biofuels haven't taken off. The decision on the blending rates for biofuels is something that has held back the movement in that regard. I looked and visited a biofuels plant near Marble Hall, and I looked at what was being done there. Besides the international biofuels plant managed by the Italians to produce jet fuel for the airlines, we were looking at biofuels from sunflower seeds. Unfortunately, the cost of the crop and the demand of the price fluctuates, so that there may be swings from surplus to famine. And as a result, the biogas plant I looked at had to rely on waste oil. And that was another competitive area. Waste oil from fryers, commercial fryers, food franchise stores, became too expensive to render that viable. So biofuels need some work, but if biofuels need to work, we need to understand that blending rate, formulation of a policy and legislation on blending rate will drive that. We can't expect huge investments from entrepreneurs or farmers into biofuels plant in the absence of having some certainty of how the demand for what they produce will be applied and whether that will generate enough income to make that a feasible investment.
And super crops, probably, what would you say is the optimal crop for biofuel?
In the plant we looked at near Marble Hall, it was essentially sunflower seeds. There's been discussion of jatropha as an alternative crop to consider for that end. I haven't seen many other alternatives in South Africa at this stage. There's a need to see the success of the plant outside Marble Hall before they commence on work within the Eastern Cape. But again, it will depend on what the fuel feedstocks are within each of those locations that will drive the success of it. Sunflower seeds today have been one of the most successful in the plant I've looked at. We have very few options to compare that with in South Africa. And abroad, and looking at the rest of Africa, with some of the work done in growing and producing oil from jatropha, that clearly is something that we may need to consider going forward. But at this stage, it's been sunflower seeds.
And finally, energy efficiency, if you have to look 30 years into the future, just how far can we take this thing?
I'm asked the question very often by people whether we would cease to need energy efficiency at some point in time. Whether by saving 5% a year, 10% a year, are we going to mean that we have no energy use in 10 years' time? It's not as simple as that. It's 10% of what your remaining balance is, but nevertheless, life doesn't stand still. We're living in a very dynamic and fluid environment. The kind of impacts and the kind of changes that will drive the need for continued energy efficiency would be, first and foremost, a seriously depleting resource of oil and coal. The others that drive the need for continual energy efficiency is the fact that we as the developing or the non-OECD bloc of the developing world are just so far behind the developed world. And that with oil and gas exploration or wealth gained through natural minerals or other natural resources, we are bound to see the growth of the economies in the developing world, accompanied with the growth in energy demand. So the proliferation of energy use for many years to come, 30 years and beyond, will be largely from the developing world, not the developed world. The developed world are in a position where they are plateauing, and in fact they are decreasing. If you look at the last 10 years, the energy consumption, notwithstanding, and you can benchmark that against an American economic activity that's comparable today. If you look at the consumption of all major fuel sources in America, they have declined by between 4 and 10%. So I believe that energy demand will plateau in Germany and in many other European countries very soon, if it's not already done so in Denmark and Norway. Contrast that with South America, Asia and Africa, where we're going to see that. So energy efficiency will continue to have a big role to play. But more importantly, within even industrial nations, companies change machines, technologies improve. We change employees. New lessons, new awareness and competency training skills have to be imparted. There are changes in processes. Companies are always expanding or contracting. They're adding more, wider variety of products to their offering. So as within that ever-changing world and that dynamic, I believe there will always be a need to drive continual improvement through energy efficiency programs like ours. There will be new people, new graduates coming into the marketplace. They will have to be inducted and taught how to embrace this behavior change necessary to sustain these gains. So I don't see an end to energy efficiency. We may see the importance of energy efficiency overshadowed by other needs. Water scarcity, or others. But energy efficiency won't fall off the table as an important topic to consider going forward for some time to come.
So anybody looking to get in that profession is going to have a job for life.
Absolutely.
Thanks for your time, sir.
It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.